Communities in certain boroughs began to change. Shop owners who had once felt safe now operated behind locked doors, wary of who might be watching. Families whispered warnings to each other, and rumors spread about who was protected and who wasn't. In these neighborhoods, the police presence increased, but it did little to break the sense of fear. Detectives tried to infiltrate the group, but the mafia's structure was almost impossible to penetrate. Members followed strict codes of silence, and loyalty was enforced through both fear and reward. New recruits were often brought in from Albania or neighboring countries, people with no local ties who could disappear if necessary. They were trained, disciplined, and made to understand that betrayal would not only cost them their lives, but might also harm their families back home. Despite the growing body count, many of the murders went unsolved. Witnesses refused to speak, evidence vanished, and potential informants either retracted statements or vanished themselves. The lack of cooperation from the public frustrated law enforcement, but for residents, the choice was simple: speak out and risk everything, or stay quiet and survive. By now, the Albanian Mafia was no longer just an invisible presence. Their power was felt in the streets, their warnings carried in whispers, and their reach extended further than anyone could measure. London's underworld had a new ruler, and they were not about to let go of their crown without a fight. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, the result of routine police work rather than a targeted investigation. A traffic patrol in East London stopped a car for what seemed like a minor violation. Inside, they found a hidden compartment beneath the back seat. Tucked inside were several handguns, stacks of cash, and multiple encrypted mobile phones. The driver, a low-ranking figure with no serious record, was taken in for questioning. While he revealed nothing, the devices in his possession became the key to a much larger discovery. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to break into the encrypted phones, eventually uncovering a series of coded messages and location data. Cross-referencing these with surveillance footage led investigators to a nondescript warehouse in an industrial district. From the outside, it looked abandoned, its windows boarded and its doors secured with heavy locks. Inside, however, was something entirely different: a massive drug shipment, neatly packaged and ready for distribution. The street value was estimated in the millions, making it one of the largest seizures in the city's recent history. The evidence directly connected the drugs to known associates of the Albanian Mafia. For the first time, law enforcement had something tangible: records, storage sites, and physical proof linking the group to high-level trafficking. This triggered a coordinated operation involving multiple police units and national agencies. In a series of early morning raids across London, dozens of suspected members were arrested. Houses, businesses, and warehouses were searched, uncovering more drugs, weapons, and forged documents. The media called it a major victory, broadcasting images of seized goods and arrested suspects. Publicly, it looked like the Albanian Mafia's network was collapsing. Politicians praised the police for their efforts, promising that organized crime in the capital was finally being dismantled. Behind the scenes, however, investigators knew the truth was more complicated. While the arrests disrupted operations, they mostly affected mid-level operators. The top figures, the ones who gave orders, moved money, and controlled supply chains, were nowhere to be found. It became clear that these leaders had anticipated trouble, distancing themselves from day-to-day activities and insulating their positions through layers of trusted intermediaries. The raids had struck a blow, but it was far from fatal. The most dangerous part of the network remained intact, watching from a distance, waiting to decide their next move. And those who understood the Mafia's history knew one thing: they would not stay quiet for long. Months after the high-profile raids, the streets of London seemed calmer. Headlines about the Albanian Mafia faded, replaced by other news. For the public, it appeared the threat had been crushed. But within the circles that understood the underworld, a different story was unfolding. Drug supplies, which had briefly slowed, began to flow again. Distribution routes reopened, and the same patterns of cash movement and intimidation quietly returned. It became evident that the arrests had only clipped the edges of the organization, not its core. The real leadership had relocated long before the police operation began. Safe in other European cities, they continued to manage operations remotely, using couriers, coded communications, and trusted lieutenants to keep business running. This distance made them untouchable, and their strategy had been refined to avoid the kind of exposure that had led to previous arrests. They no longer relied on centralized storage facilities or easily traced shipments. Instead, they broke everything into smaller, harder to detect parts, spreading risk across multiple routes and players. Law enforcement noticed the changes. Surveillance showed that suspected members were becoming even more cautious. Phones were swapped frequently, meetings took place in crowded public areas, and sensitive discussions were moved entirely offline. Financial trails, once a weak point, were now nearly impossible to follow, hidden behind cryptocurrency transactions, offshore accounts, and fake identities. In neighborhoods where their influence had once been obvious, the mafia kept a lower profile. Violence was rarer, not because they had grown weaker, but because they no longer needed to use it openly. Fear and reputation were already firmly established. Those who had dealings with them knew the consequences of betrayal without needing reminders. For investigators, the reality was frustrating. They could see the effects of the organization's work but had no way to directly connect it to those at the top. Cooperation from witnesses remained non-existent, and potential informants understood that protection programs offered no real safety from a group with such far-reaching power. The truth became clear: what had been presented as a victory was merely a temporary disruption. The Albanian Mafia's empire had not fallen, it had simply adapted. From the shadows, the leaders continued to pull strings, shaping London's criminal landscape without ever stepping foot in the city. Their operations were now harder to detect, more spread out, and just as profitable. The city believed it had won, but in reality, the most dangerous chapter of their control had only just begun. Arben Kodra and Besnik Lika were names few Londoners knew, yet their influence reached from dimly lit backrooms and East End pubs to the glittering penthouses overlooking the Thames. In public, they were ghosts never photographed, never officially linked to a crime, but in the underworld, they were feared as the masterminds who had turned the Albanian Mafia into London's most disciplined and dangerous criminal empire. Every deal, every shipment, and every quiet disappearance traced back to their decisions, made far from the streets they controlled. And as police celebrated what they thought was a crushing blow to the organization, Arben and Besnik were already 3 steps ahead, rebuilding their network in ways no one could see coming. London was a city of constant movement, its streets buzzing with life day and night, but beneath the noise and lights, a silent empire was taking shape. It began quietly, almost invisibly, with the arrival of a small group of men who understood the value of patience. They blended in, working ordinary jobs by day while building connections in the criminal underworld at night. At first, their activities seemed harmless to outsiders: small-time gambling dens tucked away in the basements of unmarked buildings, counterfeit designer goods sold from the trunks of cars, and the occasional stolen vehicle sent overseas. But this was no random collection of petty crimes. It was the foundation of something far larger. These men were disciplined and calculated, traits that set them apart from many of the chaotic street gangs operating in the city. They avoided unnecessary violence, choosing instead to negotiate, pay off, or quietly remove obstacles in their way. In the early years, their low profile was their greatest weapon. Few people even knew they existed, and those who did were too afraid to speak. The police had vague suspicions about an organized Albanian group moving into London, but without hard evidence, their investigations went nowhere. While other gangs fought openly for territory, the newcomers focused on control. They infiltrated businesses, bribed minor officials, and invested in properties that gave them both a place to operate and a way to launder money. Each move was part of a wider plan that only a handful of their most trusted members understood. The group's leadership believed in building slowly, avoiding the kind of attention that could bring everything crashing down. By the time anyone realized what was happening, their roots were already deep in the city. Within a few years, they had developed a network that stretched across boroughs, connecting London to other cities in Europe. Stolen goods, illegal betting, counterfeit documents, each scheme fed into the next, creating a steady flow of money and influence. Their name began to circulate quietly among those who worked in the shadows. People spoke of them with a mixture of respect and fear, knowing that once you were in their orbit, escape was almost impossible. And so, without headlines or public warnings, the Albanian Mafia had begun its rise. London went about its business as usual, unaware that the balance of power in its underworld was shifting. Those who were paying attention could already sense it. An invisible storm was building, and sooner or later, the the city would feel its full force. The real expansion began when the group moved into the drug trade. It was not a sudden leap but a carefully planned shift, built on the connections they had quietly formed across Europe. They understood that controlling the supply meant controlling the market, and they were determined to bypass middlemen entirely. Their cocaine shipments came from deep inside South America, smuggled through trusted routes into Europe before making their way to the UK. Each delivery was hidden inside ordinary goods, fruit crates, furniture, even building materials, making detection almost impossible. Once in London, the drugs were distributed with military-like precision. The mafia had no need for chaotic street dealers who drew police attention. Instead, they relied on a network of loyal, carefully chosen distributors who understood the risks of betrayal. Every step of the chain was monitored, and anyone suspected of disloyalty was quickly replaced. This system allowed them to move enormous quantities while remaining in the shadows. The profits were staggering. Cash poured in faster than they could spend it, and with it came the challenge of laundering the money. This was where their earlier investments paid off. They funneled dirty cash into legitimate-looking businesses, construction companies, car dealerships, and popular nightclubs. These fronts provided a steady cover for their operations, allowing illegal money to blend seamlessly with legal income. Their sophistication frustrated law enforcement. Financial investigators traced suspicious transactions, only to hit dead ends in offshore accounts and fake corporations. The group's lawyers were equally skilled, always a step ahead, ensuring that any attempt to seize assets ended in failure. Each time the police thought they had a lead, it dissolved into nothing. While their grip on the drug trade tightened, they also expanded into other profitable ventures. They took control of certain black market services, from counterfeit passports to luxury goods smuggling, ensuring they were not reliant on one single source of income. They had learned from other criminal empires that diversity meant survival. On the surface, the city continued as normal. Tourists filled the streets, nightclubs stayed busy, and markets bustled with life. But beneath it all, the Albanian Mafia's influence stretched like an invisible web, reaching into neighborhoods, businesses, and even political circles. Few people realized that a large part of London's underworld economy was now being dictated by a single, highly organized force. And for those who did know, silence was the only safe choice. The first signs of open violence began to surface when the Mafia's control faced small but dangerous challenges. Competing gangs, jealous of their success, attempted to reclaim parts of the market. At first, these disputes were handled quietly, deals struck in the background, territories redrawn without anyone noticing. But when negotiations failed, the Albanian Mafia demonstrated why they were feared. The responses were swift and brutal. Rivals disappeared overnight, their businesses shut down, their allies too afraid to continue fighting. Bodies began turning up in places no one wanted to find them: abandoned warehouses, empty construction sites, and remote areas along the Thames. The killings were not messy acts of rage. They were calculated, precise, and designed to send a message. Each death was connected to unpaid debts, betrayal, or attempts to interfere with shipments. For those paying attention, the pattern was clear. The Albanian Mafia had no interest in random violence, but they would not hesitate to remove anyone who posed a threat.